Hello and welcome back to The Haunted Beard. Thank you for joining me today. I'm very excited about today's video. So, my favorite subgenre of horror film is the psychological horror, and that's what I want to talk to you about today. I'm going to be bringing you my top 10 jacked up psychological horror movies, and now, because this is my favorite genre, this is a list that could just go on and on. I could probably give you a list of my top 50 of films that I just love and think are fantastic. So, needless to say, there's going to be a lot of probably classics and well-known ones that are not going to be on this list, but I had to narrow it down to 10. So here we go. As of today, here are my top 10 jacked up psychological horror films. Let's do it. So kicking off the list at number 10 is Shutter Island from 2010. This is directed by the master Martin Scorsese, who is one of my favorite directors. Stars Leonardo DiCaprio and Mark Ruffalo, and this is a film adaptation based off of the novel by the same name from Dennis Lehane. And this one follows a U.S. Marshal played by DiCaprio as he is investigating this institution for the criminally insane. And this one has a lot going for it. First and foremost, I love just the setting and the location. It takes place on an island inside a criminally insane institution. I mean, if you want psychological horror, what a better location to have this isolated spot for the criminally insane. And so there's just, the possibilities are endless with a location like that. And Scorsese does a great job just creating just an incredibly eerie atmosphere and creepy atmosphere. Just a lot of great suspense. DiCaprio's performance is really solid. I think it ranks up there amongst his very best. I think it's one of the ones that maybe gets talked about the least. And so just the production and set design is just phenomenal. Some really nice cinematography. There's a fantastically just creepy sequence where they finally get into this wing of the institution that they've been warned not to go to. That is just awesome. It's got just a lot of good twists and turns that keep you on the edge of your seat, keep you guessing, and ultimately it culminates, and I'll keep this spoiler free, into just, I think, a great twist ending. And then when you kind of get the full picture and the full story, there's just a lot of kind of emotional and dramatic weight to it as well. Again, DiCaprio just crushes the performance. He's phenomenal. And I like, too, that there's a bit of kind of ambiguity, too, to the final sequence in the movie. And so just an all-around great experience that I would obviously highly recommend, and that's why it sits in my top 10 at number 10. Next up at number 9 is I'm Thinking of Ending Things. This came out just a couple years ago in 2020 and was directed by Charlie Kaufman, adapted from the book of the same name by Ian Reed. And I just did my 300 subscriber Q&A and mentioned this book is one of my favorite books. And I think the film adaptation is just fantastic. This, to me, is one of the most just complex and layered films where there's just so much to it that will just reward multiple viewings. Very simply put, it follows the story of a couple who are in a relationship played by Jesse Plemons and Jesse Buckley, and he has invited her to come and visit his parents' house to meet his parents. And things just start to go weird and strange and odd, and this one is just fantastic. I think Kaufman does such a great job of capturing the essence of the book. I think it's one of the best adaptations of a book that I've seen. And this entire movie just contains so much mystery to it, to where it's like you're kind of creeped out, but you don't entirely understand why. And there's so much mystery to the dialogue and to the relationships, and you're trying to kind of piece the puzzle together and figure out what exactly is going on here. And it's just phenomenal. I mean, it is exactly everything that I just love in a movie, as it just kind of gives you little clues. And I just love films that just have a lot of that depth there, to where it rewards multiple viewings and you can pick up on new things each and every time you watch it. And I also like, too, what Kaufman did with the ending. And the ending in the film is a little bit different from the book. But man, I thought just the kind of the creative direction he chose to go in the film is just phenomenal. Really, just kind of a beautiful ending in some way, but also a really sad, depressing ending another way. But man, this is just a phenomenal film. And if you haven't seen it, it's on Netflix. It's awesome. You got to check it out. So that is my number 9. Coming in at number 8 is A Tale of Two Sisters from South Korea, and this came out in 2003 and was directed by Kim Ji-woon, who has directed a couple other films that I greatly enjoy, one of them being I Saw the Devil. And I just rewatched this just a couple days ago for the first time in years. I've been meaning to rewatch it for a while now and finally got a chance to watch it, and man, this thing is just, man, it's really quite great. And what I love what it does here is there's a bit of almost kind of a fairy tale-ish type vibe to it. It is still a psychological horror and mystery and thriller, and it is really just the story of these two sisters who are dealing with some tragedy in their family. And that's all I'm going to give regarding the plot, but man, this thing is so well told just in terms of the story. It's such a quiet film too. I was really surprised by how quiet it was when I was watching it, and to me, it just adds so much to the atmosphere, and it adds so much to the suspense. And this one is a bit of a more kind of slower paced, a more patient film. But so much of what happens is just very mysterious. And if you pay close attention, the film kind of leaves little clues and little breadcrumbs throughout it that also I think will reward multiple viewings. There's just kind of more stuff that you can pick up on. And this film has some really solid atmosphere and is just really, I think, a great mystery. I just love how it tells its story, that so much of what happens leads to just so many more questions, which to me is just, it's why I love psychological horror to begin with. And this film, Tale of Two Sisters, just plays into that great, to where so much of what happens, you're asking like, well, what does that mean? Well, why did that happen? Well, why did they do this? And why did they do that? And it just creates this mystery and intrigue that just grabs you and pulls me right in. There's about 3 sequences particularly in this movie that are just phenomenal, and they're so suspenseful that really kind of creep me out. There's a scene, I think it's about halfway through, where the characters are at a dinner table. And so far, like up until that point in the movie, things have just kind of played out very quietly and slowly, and then something happens and it's kind of like all hell breaks loose. And man, it's just such this shocking and disturbing moment. And also, too, this film deserves some credit. This film has a legitimate, like, triple twist ending that is just kind of mind-blowing. And if you're familiar and you've watched a lot of psychological horror, sometimes you can kind of predict the twist. And so, you know, maybe you can predict one of them, but there's no way you're going to be able to call all 3 of these. It's just awesome, and I absolutely love it. So do yourself a favor, go check out A Tale of Two Sisters, and that is my number 8. Next up at number 7 is Annihilation. This came out in 2018. It was directed by Alex Garland, who I'm a big fan of. And this one is also a sci-fi film as well. It stars Natalie Portman, and she is this biologist and former soldier who is going into this quarantine zone that is called the Shimmer. And it is this zone that is expanding, that is believed to contain some sort of artificial-like intelligence. And she's going in there to investigate because her husband went in there and he has now disappeared. If you like psychological horror with some sci-fi mixed in, you can't go wrong with Annihilation. The visuals here are just gorgeous, and part of what makes this movie so interesting is that once the characters enter into the Shimmer zone, the laws of physics and laws of science are not the same inside the zone as they are outside. And so the possibilities are endless. And so you have all sorts of just strange and weird and bizarre stuff that's happening that just makes this thing so compelling and interesting. It's got some just good kind of weird factor, bizarre factor to it. It's got some good kind of just disturbing and messed up aspects to it. It's got a particular scene, I'll just say, involving a bear that is just really intense and suspenseful and scary. Just one of the highlights of the movie. And it's got an ending that is just super memorable in all the best ways, just very bizarre and kind of enigmatic. And that is part of, I think, what makes psychological horror so great, is that it just adds so much to rewatchability, where there's just so much there that's kind of up for interpretation, and it just largely rewards those rewatches, and you can kind of pick up on more things and try to put the pieces together, and Annihilation is no exception to that. So that is why I love it, and that's why it comes in at number 7. Next up at number 6 is Midsommar, directed by Ari Aster, who is quickly becoming one of my favorite directors. This came out in 2019, stars Florence Pugh, and man, this movie is just an absolute trip. She plays a girlfriend who has gone through a tragedy and doesn't know it at the beginning, but is with her boyfriend who wants to break up with her, but she ends up tagging along with him and his college buddies as they travel to Sweden for this midsummer festival. And the first thing that sticks out about this is the opening 15 minutes are just unreal. If you could section off those 15 minutes, it's one of the best horror short films I have ever seen. I mean, talk about kicking this thing off with a bang. It is messed up and disturbing, and my goodness, holy smokes. Ari Aster, man, just, golly, you know how to start a movie. But also, too, I think what makes this film so special and stick out amongst so many other horror films is this has got to be maybe the most brightly lit and colorful horror movie probably that I've ever seen. It is absolutely beautiful, and the area that they go to is this small little village. And it's just gorgeous. I mean, just the set design is beautiful. All just the architecture and the stuff that they built, and just the colors and the floral pastel kind of color palette to this whole thing is just amazing looking. Florence Pugh's performance, I think, is just phenomenal. And this is another film that is, I think, kind of more of a slow burn. At least it starts off with a bang, and then there's kind of a slow burn until, you know, you kind of progress towards the climax. But this is another one, too, that just has such great atmosphere as things just start to slowly progress and get more and more uncomfortable and bizarre and weird until you're in just absolute horror by the end of it. There's another scene that sticks out where they're doing this ritualistic sacrifice where the people jump off the cliff, and my goodness, Ari Aster knows how to just grab your attention with some body horror. Good grief. Ultimately, this thing culminates in just a memorably messed up ending, and I like to think of it in a way as this is sort of a relationship drama story of a relationship that goes really, really awry. And like I said, Florence Pugh is really great in this. It's absolutely beautiful looking, and even just some of the camera work and stuff is just awesome. So can't recommend it highly enough. Midsommar sits at number 6. Coming in at number 5 is Enemy from 2013, starring Jake Gyllenhaal, directed by Denis Villeneuve. And this is actually a movie I've reviewed on my channel already. So if you want some more in-depth thoughts, check out that review. But man, Enemy is just such a great time. And in this movie, Jake Gyllenhaal, who is playing two characters, he is up late one night and watching a movie, and he sees himself, his own doppelganger, in the movie. And so he goes to seek him out and find what in the world is going on. And this is a movie that it goes beyond just sort of telling a story in sort of the typical narrative structure. So many times when we're watching movies, you just kind of interpret the events of the movie at kind of very straightforward and at face value, but Enemy just kind of really throws that upside down. And so much of what happens is kind of meant to be sort of symbolic and metaphorical and things like that. And there is just so much here to kind of explore. There's the whole symbolism with the spider that I just find fascinating. I think Gyllenhaal's performance is just fantastic. It just overall maintains just such a great atmosphere, which I feel like I'm going to say for all of these. But again, that psychological horror atmosphere is just why I love these. And it's another one of those too where you're kind of getting little puzzle pieces and little breadcrumbs dropped throughout it. Again, it's going to reward multiple viewings. And it's almost like every scene, every bit of dialogue, you're kind of, you know, really kind of looking into it a little bit more than normal and trying to figure out what exactly is he saying here? What exactly does this mean? And it's just fascinating. It's got some just good suspense and just kind of good, really kind of a bizarre, creepy factor to it as well. And I'm going to say this with probably all these culminates into just a great, memorable final shot that really just kind of blows your mind, and it is just one of those sort of like, what in the world does that mean endings, to where it immediately makes me want to watch the whole thing all over again. So Enemy is one of my favorites, directed by one of my favorite directors, and so it sits at my list at number 5. All right, next up at number 4 is The Lighthouse, directed by Robert Eggers, who is also becoming one of my favorite directors. This came out in 2019, stars Robert Pattinson and Willem Dafoe, and dude, this movie is such an experience. I don't think I have ever seen anything quite like this. From the black and white cinematography, which is just absolutely gorgeous, just the visual presentation alone in this movie is just phenomenal. I mean, there's so many individual shots that are just, they just look beautiful, and they're just so well kind of composed and constructed, and they're just so memorable. Just the individual shots in this movie, the performances are just amazing. This is one of those movies that I think sometimes gets labeled as pretentious, and look, everybody can have their opinion, it's totally fine, but I will stand by this. I don't see how you can label a film pretentious that has fart jokes in it. And this has fart jokes in it, and they're hilarious. And as I said, the performances are just phenomenal. This might be the best Willem Dafoe performance I've ever seen. Also, what Eggers does with the sound design. Like, the sound itself in this movie is like its own character and just adds so much to just the vibe of it and the atmosphere. I absolutely love the setting. I love that they filmed it in 4:3 full screen, and so much about this thing just, it feels so authentic. It takes place in like the mid to late 1800s, and just everything from the set design to the costumes, and especially the dialogue, it just rings true. It feels like you've actually discovered this crazy film from the late 1800s and you're actually watching it. It's just amazing. Everything about this just rings true and just feels authentic. And I just love how absolutely insane this movie gets. It has been correctly described as a descent into madness, and it absolutely is. And I love the ride every single time that I watch it. And it's just such a creative and unique experience that I just love. I think there's also some depth there, just going into mythology and tales of the sea and stuff like that. And the ending is just phenomenal. I think it's very kind of enigmatic and just sort of cerebral and kind of fantastical in a way. But man, it's such a great experience, and I absolutely love this thing. And so that's why it sits at number 4. All right, here we go. Top 3 time. Coming in at number 3 for me is Mulholland Drive. And this came out in 2001, stars Naomi Watts and Laura Elena Herring, and is directed by, oh, good old David Lynch. Man, David Lynch knows how to jack up my mind and mess with me and freak me out unlike anybody. This is such an experience, and this is, I think, it's not only one of my favorite psychological horror movies, but I think this is one of the greatest mysteries in movie history, certainly that I've ever seen. And this is a movie that it's just so uniquely told in terms of just its story. And I don't think anybody does it better than David Lynch when it comes to creating a very dreamlike and cerebral quality and feeling to his movies. He does such a phenomenal job at just transporting you into the world of his movies and just making you feel things. And he's just an absolute master. And so you just get such these bizarre experiences with his movies, and there's just all sorts of stuff to talk about. I did a video on this movie already, just highlighting a specific scene, and that's the scene from the Winky's cafe scene, which I think is, to me, one of the scariest scenes that I've ever seen. I think it's absolutely phenomenal. There's another great scene in this movie that I think really kind of highlights what Lynch does masterfully, and that's when Naomi Watts and Laura Herring end up going to Club Silencio. You have this scene where you think this woman is singing, only the whole time you realize that she's just lip syncing to this recording. And every time I feel like that scene gets me, and it just like kind of reminds me how sort of magical movies are. And it just kind of messes with, it kind of brings up the whole sort of perception versus reality thing, that what we perceive to be true isn't always true and isn't always real. And I just like how Mulholland Drive sort of handles that like what you think you're seeing might not exactly be what you think it is. And this movie kind of plays into that and has a lot to do with dreams, and it's just so atmospheric. It's got some beautiful music as well. Great performances. Naomi Watts is fantastic in this. And, you know, obviously, I mean, if you haven't seen this, holy smokes, do yourself a favor and go out and watch it, because it is phenomenal. And you will not forget it. And it will mess you up for a while. So go check out Mulholland Drive if you haven't yet. That's my number 3. Coming in at number 2 is the classic from 1980, The Shining, starring Jack Nicholson, Shelley Duvall, and directed by maybe the greatest of all time, Stanley Kubrick. And there's not a whole lot I can say about this movie that hasn't already been said. It's just fantastic. Jack Nicholson's performance is legendary and iconic. And I mean, I would certainly imagine if you're a horror film fan watching this, you have probably seen The Shining. But I just love it. I love the isolated location set in the Overlook Hotel. I love just the atmosphere. I love their just the camera movements and just the composition are just so memorable, with just the steady cam following Danny and his tricycle down the halls, even down to the memorable carpet pattern that as soon as you see that carpet pattern, it just triggers all these pictures of The Shining. And every time I watch this, I'm just captivated by Nicholson, his performance, and the character. And just seeing his descent into just becoming completely mad and unhinged. The set design on this thing is just gorgeous. I mean, even just the scenes in the bathroom with just the red colors, there's just so much visually about this movie that is just so memorable and just sticks out. And I think Shelley Duvall, too, doesn't get the credit that she deserves. I think her performance in this is phenomenal, man. When she's got the little knife and she's kind of swinging at Jack as she's kind of backing up the stairs, is just awesome, man. Her performance is so great. It's got some great suspense. It's got some great atmosphere. It's got just some great messed up moments. I mean, the guy in the bear suit, what the heck is going on there? And ultimately, it leads to just a iconic climax with Nicholson out in the maze in the snow, and then of course one of the probably most famous final shots of any movie ever, where you see the picture and everything you thought you knew just totally gets thrown on its head. And it's just captivating and grabs me every single time that I watch it. I absolutely love this thing. The Shining sits at number 2. All right, here we are, number 1 time. And in reality, probably any one of these 10 movies could vie for that number 1 spot. Like I said, psychological horrors are my absolute favorite. And so, I mean, there's even films that are not on this list that, I mean, I absolutely adore. But as of right now, today, for this list, my number 1 is Seven. And Seven came out in 1995, stars Brad Pitt, Morgan Freeman, and is directed by David Fincher, who is also one of my favorites. And Seven is just special. And one of the things that I love about Seven is that this whole time you are, you're watching this kind of murder mystery detective story, right? And it's a thriller. But then when you get to the end, it is one of the most horrific, memorable, disturbing endings I've ever seen. and the way it sort of reveals itself is just phenomenal because it uses so much restraint, and it gets away with the reveal by just, you know, sort of through suggestion. And I love that it doesn't even go for the over the top gore, considering how much of that we've had throughout the movie. But man, I could go on and on about this thing. The visual presentation of this thing is just unbelievable. Just the set design and the actual murder set pieces where they discover the victims are just, my goodness. I mean, this movie is about as dirty and gritty and grungy, but man, it just contributes overall to such an incredible experience. This is a movie, it's like you almost feel like you need to take a bath after you watch it, and I mean that as a compliment because it's just phenomenal. The performances between Pitt and Freeman are just great, and they play off one another so well. Pitt even has a handful of lines that make me laugh, so it's got a little bit of humor in there. It's got just such a phenomenal scene, too, that is like one of the great jump scares of all time, where you got the whole SWAT team going in to find the sloth victim, and, you know, this guy looks just... he looks like a skeleton, and all of a sudden he takes a breath, and he just scares the crap out of you. It's just a phenomenal scene. And look, this thing is absolutely terrific. I also think that this is one of the best mysteries ever put to film, and I will say that it is tied for my all-time favorite serial killer movie. I won't say what it's tied with because I'm thinking about possibly including that movie in its own separate video. But anyways, this movie is phenomenal. It is endlessly rewatchable. It still holds up no matter how many times I get to the end of this thing. The ending just, man, floors you every single time. And Kevin Spacey as John Doe is, my goodness, just haunting and memorable. And that is why it sits at the top of my list, at least for today anyway, of all-time favorite psychological horror movies. So, that's all I got for you, but please hit me up in the comments down below. I would love to hear from you. What are your favorites? Please let me know. Let's get the conversation going. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you like content like this, please hit that subscribe button. There's plenty more where this came from. It's all horror and thriller content on The Haunted Beard. So hit that subscribe button, and I will see you next time on The Haunted Beard.